Howdy, and welcome to the 8:30 Live. And as per yesterday's discussion, we've been talking a lot. Talking's been fun. Started during the pandemic, but now it's time, the election approaches, to start dedicating more of the spare hours to act. Particularly because everything that's in the news sort of makes me really concerned that Donald Trump is not going to go quietly. Heaven forbid he should actually win the election. Be to have a close election because he's going to try to pull some funny business. So, one, if the election is close, perhaps the funny dove he pulls during the election tips it so that he legitimately wins, voter suppression, all this other stuff. Then, in the event that it is actually a close race, he'll simply claim that there was interference from an outside power, nullify the results of states' votes. And we went over this potential outcome a couple of, last week. But constitutionally speaking, if he's able to nullify the electoral votes of some states because he claims that there was fraud or duplicitous activity or an outside power intervened and cast those results into questions, then he can invalidate those electoral college votes. And if you remove some states from the equation, nobody will be able to reach 270 electoral college votes, which is the required majority to win the presidency. And then the vote goes to Congress, where Donald Trump actually has the advantage, and the Republicans could hand the presidency back to him. So the third worst case scenario is that he actually loses in a pretty big loss, in which case he simply just digs into the White House and refuses to leave. So, everything is pointing to the fact that Donald Trump does not want to exit the presidency. He's got his federal police forces going around kidnapping people. He has got, today he issued an executive order which mandated that census counters not include undocumented immigrants in the census, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. The Constitution is very clear about who gets counted in the United States: residents. And we'll take it one step further and say that in other parts of the Constitution, citizens are referred to explicitly. So it's not that the founders didn't know the difference between citizens and residents. It's that they specifically had the census take into account the number of residents, not the number of citizens. So Donald Trump is now, and as mentioned yesterday, he's having Bush's old attorney who made the legal argument. I don't want to say found a legal justification. Made the legal argument for torture. He had that fellow come up with an argument for how Donald Trump can circumvent the law and rule by decree. So, as I mentioned yesterday, this is now going to be about work, and I'm setting aside time every day to focus on organizing. So let me tell you a little about what I'm working on. Simon Sachs says, "Hi, Ben." Hello, Simon. For some reason, your video is not in sync with the audio. No, that's weird. That I don't think has ever happened before. I don't really know what to do about that. It may be the internet connection, but there's nothing I can do. I guess I could end the live and restart it, but usually that's not such a great idea. But that being said, this won't be too long because I've got a meeting at 9:30, but I'll just give you a sense of what I'm working on tonight for my round of organizing. And everybody, I encourage everybody to find some time to do a little bit of organizing every day. Make some phone calls for Joe Biden, for a Senate candidate, write some postcards to engage voters. It happened last night too. Well, then I really don't know what to say. I'll have to look into it. Thanks for letting me know. But for my part, what I'm focused on right now is the Democratic State Committee meeting. The Democratic State Committee, which some folks might remember I'm on, and I was just recently sort of reelected to. I didn't have an opponent, so I got on by default. That we're meeting in August. We're meeting virtually, but we'll be electing DNC members, and we'll also be electing a couple of convention delegates. Not all convention delegates, as I've spoken about before, are actually elected during the primary for the presidency. There are also about a third which are chosen by the Democratic State Party. But that being said, what I've been working on is, I'm very happy to say, actually, I managed to get all the signatures needed to submit an ethics rules change, which would add sexual misconduct and discrimination as something which is against the rules of the Democratic Party. Currently, there's no mention of it whatsoever. And it would create an independent mechanism for adjudicating ethics disputes, which you'd think would be there. Actually, maybe you wouldn't think. Our institutions have a very long and well-known and bad history of having ethics disputes heard by those who are already in power. But this would create an independent panel that is separate from the leadership. Right now, the chair effectively picks the 5 people who will be deciding any ethics violation complaint by Democratic Party leadership. So that's not good. So this creates an independent panel. It would also have all of the ethics rules apply to the members of the State Committee and Executive Board, because right now the ethics rules only apply to, quote, party leaders, which are like the chair and the executive officers of the State Committee. And so really we want to get everybody who's either elected to leadership in the party or appointed to leadership in the party at least to be covered by the majority of these ethics rules, even though there are some which are particular to the executive policy-making arms of the Democratic Party, which State Committee members technically don't fall under, nor really do most of the Executive Committee members. And then the last thing it does is it sets aside money to have actual professionals. Well, I mean, we had professionals look at this, attorneys and what have you, look at these rules, but sets aside money and resources to bring in experts in the field, particularly in sexual harassment and discrimination, to look at the party's rules and to look at the way that we process these ethics complaints, particularly when there's victimization, so that we can make our rules even better. Even though I feel like what we've put together, I and a couple others have put together, is very good and makes huge strides in the right direction, particularly in the independence of the ethics adjudicators, I certainly don't think that we have reached the finish line. So those are the sort of the things that, I was able to get the signatures required to submit it. So it'll come to the floor and we'll be debating it at the State Committee meeting, unless shenanigans are pulled, which I don't put them past. They might try to make all sorts of claims because of coronavirus. We don't have time to deal with these things. It's too complicated. We can't vote appropriately. We'll see. And the next thing is, right now, I'm trying to gather up the requisite 10 signatures, and I've got more than 10 people willing to sign on. It's just the busy work of collecting all the signatures and putting it together onto an emergency resolution, which I wrote regarding Trump's secret police, which supports our Attorney General's promise to sue the federal government if they try any funny business here. But 2, and this is actually, I think, pretty radical, pretty gutsy. 2, calls on our democratic elected officials and all democracy-loving elected officials, regardless of party, but our mayors and our governor, to order local law enforcement to intervene, investigate, and halt any abductions of civilians made by unidentified federal forces or federal officers without probable cause and due process. So this is, I've mentioned this a couple of times on Facebook and Twitter, how local law enforcement needs to be the ones protecting our rights. And people have mentioned that, this is effectively a constitutional crisis, but I think we're ready to have the constitutional crisis asking whether or not the federal government can simply abduct civilians off the street into unmarked vans by unmarked soldiers or unmarked law enforcement officers. And, I'll go one step further and say that when people are unmarked, and there was a meme floating about this actually today, I noticed, and I was like, yeah, see, this is the problem. I posted, one of the first posts I made about this is, when you don't, when your law enforcement is unmarked, anybody can pretend to be law enforcement, and you have no idea whether or not when you're being picked up in an unmarked van by unmarked people in camouflage, whether or not those people are white nationalists, whether they're terrorists, whether they're federal law enforcement, which means that pretty much anybody can just dress up in camouflage gear and walk around with AR-15s or M16s or, firearms and expect not to be hassled by the police and expect to rough up anybody that they want, which is extremely, extremely dangerous. Blurring the lines between militant civilians and actual law enforcement is exactly what the SA did. This is Hitler's brown shirts. They took it upon themselves to be enforcers for the party, and their role was blurred with that of the actual police, so that people couldn't contest their activities. So one might ask, what's the value of a resolution of the Democratic State Committee calling for this? And I would simply say that while it's not as if it's law, I'm certainly not in the legislature or what have you, while it's not as if it's law, the resolution will provide political cover for our Democratic leaders in the event that things really turn bad, to use local law enforcement and know that they have the political support of local Democratic Party leadership in an effort to use local law enforcement to intercede and intervene in federal activities, which could be a very charged move. And so saying that the representatives of Democratic voters across the state are in fact on board with something so gutsy is, I think, actually an important thing to do, an important move to make. So hopefully we can get these passed. I'm moving through these signatures so that we can get it introduced. Hopefully we can get this resolution passed and make it the official Democratic Party platform that we're going to stand behind and support all of our elected officials who use local law enforcement to prevent unidentified federal law enforcement from violating due process and the constitutional guarantees given to us as citizens of the United States. Now, there are a couple of comments. Elizabeth Stop says, Joe Biden is too old to be president and his mind is not fast or sharp enough. Well, I will say this. I'll take you over Donald Trump. Simon Sachs, Ben, you need to talk to my brother-in-law. He is an attorney who specializes in sexual harassment. He has a lot of expertise in this area. That'd be great. I mean, the rules are already, they're going to be put on the docket and noticed, but I'm always happy to offer friendly amendments from the floor. Well, actually, I'm carrying it, so other people can offer friendly amendments, or I can propose changes from the floor, which would then be adopted. So I'd love to be in touch with them. Yes, please. Elizabeth, local law enforcement is a joke, especially here in New York. I mean, of course, the big question is, even if we were to pass a resolution like this, and even if our civilian leadership were to order local law enforcement to do such a thing, would they do it? And honestly, I do have fears as well that local law enforcement simply would not carry through on their job to listen to the civilian elected leadership of our city and state. The state troopers might, I think, get along better with Andrew Cuomo, but NYPD, I don't know whether or not they would take the side of New York and New York's elected leaders over Donald Trump and the Department of Homeland Security and, Customs and Borders Patrol, which are doing these egregious things. So I'm not oblivious to that concern. It's just that this is our first step in what we can do to pave the way for enabling and empowering our local electeds to stand up to federal tyranny. I mean, these are words I never thought I'd have to utter. It's ridiculous. Elizabeth Stops. I heard that the guy with Homeland Security took a guy in the van to question him and let him go a block away. There have been multiple abductions. Actually, I want to call out Portland here. Portland, yesterday, there was a gigantic gigantic, I say rally or vigil in the evening. And, I posted up about it on Facebook. There were tons of people there standing up to this behavior by the federal government. And I think that's fantastic. Police did disperse them with tear gas. Then there were these moms that you might have heard about who linked arms, and they were tear gassed. Absolutely no threat to anybody. They were ultimately tear gassed. So today, dads, at least that's how they're being billed. Dads showed up with leaf blowers, so that if the police tried to shoot tear gas again to the moms who were joining arms, then the dads would come in with the leaf blowers and disperse and blow away the gas. So things are escalating in a way that may sort of seem amusing to us over here, but understand that police tear gassing a line of defenseless and peacefully protesting moms is just ridiculous. We live in the United States of America. We have First Amendment rights. For this to have to escalate, even in a way that seems sort of funny, is absolutely, it's just, it's hard to fathom how we came to this point. Now, to Elizabeth's comment about the person who was abducted and then let go, there have been many instances of people being abducted, and one, which I posted up about this man, Pettibone, his telling of it was he was abducted. He was taken off the street for no reason that he could discern. He was driven around lower downtown Portland for a while, brought into an undisclosed location. It turned out to be the federal courthouse, but that's sort of irrelevant. If you don't know where you are, you might as well have been renditioned to a third-party country, which is something that the Bush administration actually did, which is how they, and again, we get into this attorney who's writing up the legal argument for why Trump should be able to rule by decree, but that was how they justified torture in the Bush administration, by picking up people while they were abroad in other countries and taking them to third-party black sites, which were not under the jurisdiction of the United States, so that the laws of the United States didn't apply. So taking somebody to an undisclosed location is effectively a violation of their constitutional rights, because once you're there, you have no capacity to exercise your due process rights, right? So in the case of Pettibone, they took him to the federal courthouse, but he did not know where he was. And so they detained him without booking him. They didn't take him to a jail for holding, and they didn't book him. So there's no receipt. There's no information being given about where he is, why he's being held, and he is not then given his access to an attorney. Instead, what they do is they take him and hold him for a few hours. By the way, being held for any amount of time without having been given cause is completely unacceptable. But that aside, he's held for a few hours and his stuff is searched. Now, searching somebody without a warrant or probable cause, completely unconstitutional. And finally, after hours have elapsed, two officers come in to read him his Miranda rights. Now, you're supposed to be read your Miranda rights at the time of the arrest. But they come in, they ask him to waive his Miranda rights and answer a few questions. He demands his lawyers. They hold him for another hour and a half, but cease questioning him, and then they release him without any record of his having been arrested. Now, this is tremendously problematic for many, many reasons. First and foremost, what it implies is that the federal government can pick anybody up and hold them indefinitely without cause, because the fact that it was only a few hours is sort of irrelevant. They happen to let these people go. It doesn't matter how soon they let you go if there's no recourse for getting out, right? It's simply arbitrary and up to your captors whether they choose to be done with you. And that is a violation of the Constitution. Then, without any identification and any record as to who arrested you and why, there is no way to fight or penalize or hold accountable those officers for doing their job improperly. Again, I said this before, but what makes the police a secret police is not the fact that nobody knows they exist. Everybody knows the secret police exist. They weren't a secret in Russia. They weren't a secret in Germany. The secret police are not a secret. What's secret about them is who they are and how they operate and how they're observing you and when they're observing you. Because as long as those things are secret, you cannot hold that institution or those individuals accountable. And it's the accountability that's so important. So whether or not this person was released in a timely manner, I would say they weren't. But to your person who was, released a few blocks away, whether or not they were released in a timely manner is almost irrelevant, because having had their constitutional rights violated, they were incapable of following up and holding those officers accountable, or even holding the department accountable, because they had no idea who had abducted them. And they had no evidence that it had happened. So the process by which people are arrested and detained and ultimately jailed and put to trial is so important. All of the Constitution is effectively about process. Process is what makes democracy work, because only through process can you curtail the rights. No, only through process can you guarantee the rights of individuals and curtail them of government and law enforcement and politicians. And that is the foundational belief of the United States, of limited government, of maximal self-governance. And this is a catastrophic fraying of those processes. Simon, people should write letters to the U.S. attorney and the judge to remind them of their duty under the Constitution. I don't know if that sort of stuff works anymore. I think these things just have to be battled out. I mean, the U.S. attorney, so just so that it's known, the U.S. attorney in Portland, Washington, they're suing the federal government over this. And the mayor has told the feds to leave. But ultimately, it comes down to whether or not Donald Trump will pull back and whether or not the federal law enforcement agents will continue to listen to him and continue to act out his orders. He's already threatened to send more federal police and to do the same things in Chicago and New York City. Now, we'll see this weekend if he follows through on his threat, but this is absolutely 100% something that could continue to happen regardless of what occurs in courts. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, that the courts decide this is illegal. All right, is Donald stop? I don't know. I'm pretty sure we already are clear on the fact that this is a gross violation of the Constitution and should be, on the face of it, illegal. If the courts order him to stop, what is the likelihood that Donald Trump will actually cease giving orders to Homeland Security to undertake these operations, and that the people who he's put in charge will listen to the courts over him? And even if they did stop, what's to stop them on election day when this sort of behavior could actually alter the outcome of the election? Then, in the best case scenario, we have all of this nonsense going on, and if Donald Trump wins, we have to contest that election in court and redo it because there was interference by federal agents intimidating and abducting people, and or supporters of Donald Trump posing as law enforcement. So, we really have to nip this thing in the bud, and we really have to guarantee that our local electeds and our local law enforcement are going to secure the rights of individuals so that we can go about being citizens of the United States and preparing for a regular voting process in November. Otherwise, what we're looking forward to is the possibility of interruptions and foul play, which we'll have to adjudicate in court after the fact. And that is not a winning strategy for removing a dictator from office, because as long as they hold power, the longer they hold power, particularly the longer they hold it illegitimately, the more entrenched they become in that power. Thusly, the resolution I'm putting together now, and I actually need to get to another meeting, unfortunately. But this has been a lot of fun, and I have felt very passionately about the things we've been talking about. So let's do it again sometime, shall we, friends? All right. With that, since basically everything I say would be a reiteration, and unless there's another comment, I'll wait another 30 seconds if folks want to drop a comment. But otherwise, let's all go back to organizing. All right. Then I'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Oh, you're welcome, Simon. I'll see you then.